I'm really excited to be here. It's a fantastic, it's a pleasure for me actually, because I've always been fascinated with presentations, and it's something that I think most people agree, whether you've gone through college or you left after school, or maybe you've been to university, it's something that you can always do better at. It's not something we often dedicate the time to have. And for that reason, it's a really great opportunity. And what I'm going to try and do is share the secrets that have served me best when not only just helping myself, but supporting businesses and other companies as well that I've collaborated with. So let's move on, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we're going to look at today. So in terms of creating impactful presentations, that's what we're focusing on here. There will be a lot of design elements that we discuss, but it's more about what strategies can we apply and utilize to get the biggest impact on our audience. So as you can see here, we're going to go for a quick introduction. We're going to look through what presenting is like in 2022. I've got a 5-step process that I use that incorporates some of the strategies you might find online or from other backgrounds. And it's sort of tailored to what I think is the quickest and most efficient way to get a presentation done. I'm a big fan of psychology. First impressions we will go into. We're going to look at how to set a tone and a story behind your content and your message. And of course, leveraging these amazing aesthetic tools and resources we have available to us today. And of course, some best practices, tips, and hacks. So let's move on. I'll tell you a quick overview about me. So in terms of my academic background, I have studied psychology at university, as I love trying to figure out what makes people do the things they do, and whether that's the different color we use on a button in an e-shop and that creates more sales, or whether it's something completely deeper than that in terms of how to motivate or galvanize an audience. After that, I studied digital marketing and tried to fuse the two skill sets there to help clients in my consultation to give their product and their service the best chance without killing themselves, spending hours and hours and hours worrying about fonts or not being creative. And I genuinely believe today is an era where we are so much more capable to focus on our strengths, whether you're a lawyer, whether you want to be a dentist or whatever it may be, start your own business. You no longer have to worry about design, but I will give you some tips and tricks. Besides that, I'm now living in Barcelona. I am from London originally. And yeah, my passions are self-development and making things look pretty in the digital world. So what types of presentations do we have to look at here? Now, I'm sure all of you have various different ideas about where you want to go and who you want to be. But the bottom line is we have very key principles when it comes to grabbing someone's attention, keeping them engaged, and influencing them in a way that we want to not only just tell our story, but when the presentation's finished, did they remember what we spoke about? And how do they feel? How does the audience feel? Do they feel like they were motivated? Were they informed? Is it a job interview type presentation where you've got to convince someone? So we're going to go through the key principles that apply to various different scenarios. And at the end of this presentation, I would love to hear your thoughts. If you have any questions, please just make a note of it. And at the end, we will circle back and get to that. So here's an amazing statistic, okay? Some of you probably have been through some really boring Zoom meetings. Some of you have probably been through way too many than you would like. So a little statistic there, there's about 300 million daily participants on Zoom every day. Well, what does that mean? It means whenever we are creating something, it doesn't have to be just Zoom. We've got to think about how are we going to make sure that the person who is coming into this meeting or presentation isn't going to be bored or distracted? How are we going to make sure that we take note of this fact here, that there's so many meetings going on every day and we stand out from the crowd? There's a 42% rate there of us that have experienced Zoom fatigue. It happens. It's human psychology. You sit down in a chair, you might have been working all day, And what we're going to try and do is look for ways to avoid this. So I'd really like to hear from you guys, first of all. Don't be shy. What is it, do you think, it may be one thing that you really don't like in a presentation? So feel free to write in the chat now. I'll keep an eye on it. For me personally, I hate when there are, well, for me, it needs to be one of two things. I love listening to charismatic talkers, and then the slides are not so important. And I also like looking at pretty colorful slides as well. So I tend to get frustrated where there's not one focus on either of those two areas. I wonder if we've got any comments coming through here just now. Nothing at the moment, but essentially bad presentations can be for a number of reasons. And for me, one of the main reasons you've got a bad presentation is you haven't thought about who you're speaking to. You haven't thought about what are they walking into that room after doing. Let's look at some statistics that will affect how we create this value for them. So I personally am someone, probably like most people, that gets a little bit anxious when I'm making a presentation. You can see here 45% of people find it difficult just getting the creative side of it locked down. And as well, finding those great visuals, around 41%. It's not easy. So what can we do to make the process more streamlined? So when we arrive, we've got the ammunition, we've got the tools to actually impress and communicate completely clearly with a good understanding in our head of what we're going to talk about. I personally agree with the stat on the left that 91% of presenters will feel more confident presenting with a well-designed slide deck. What we're going to try and do here is not spend too much time on creating a deck. I read somewhere that it can take around 8 hours for the average person to create a deck, but sometimes you don't have that time. And how can we use online templates, fantastic apps that have free and some premium versions to leverage our communications? We've got a 5-step plan here. Like I said, this is something that I use to help me go from A to B. When someone tells me, Billy, we've got to pitch or make a presentation to the client or to whoever it might be, the new company we're collaborating with, this is the 5 steps I go through. And you go from research and planning all the way through to putting a skeleton of the presentation together, making it look a bit more beautiful, a bit more stunning. And then the creme de la creme, the je ne sais quoi at the end, just to give it that punch and make sure people remember you. So what's the first step we're going to focus on? Research and planning. For me, it's not rocket science. Know your audience. If you know your audience, you cannot go wrong. And when I say know your audience, I don't mean just know who is in the room and have a rough idea. What is motivating them to listen to you? Is there anything that they want to listen to? And what value are you going to provide to that person? I understand there's different people in the group, and so sometimes you'll have to accommodate for having various personality types in there. Let's have a little look at 2 things I always do. Number 1, if you are not checking the LinkedIn of the people that you're about to present to, you're missing out on so much information, and you don't have to look for very long. You can simply type in the name to LinkedIn, 90% of people, you'll find them there. And then you can relax because you've seen their face, and you can also see their background. Okay, in this situation where we've got 20 or 30, 40 people in a webinar, I couldn't do that, but I like to speak with Bhavik before to understand what your motivations are and what you're trying to get out of this webinar. And that's what I've tried to focus on. Underneath, you'll see I actually write down the names with a pen, the people who I'm going to present to. Why do I do that? Well, from a psychological point of view, something happens in the brain and in terms of your memory and retention. When you write someone's name down on a piece of paper or a list of people, you are so better equipped in a moment to say, Steve, what do you think about that right there? Or Mohammed, how did you think that presentation went last week? To call people out and keep them engaged. I had a presentation with a client last week and his Zoom name was actually different to his real name. And I mumbled and fumbled because I hadn't done this practice by writing his name down beforehand. And I nearly called him some completely weird name that was obviously something like his surname and his first letter of his first name. So these are my 2 musts. Know your people, write it down. It takes 5-10 minutes and you will smash the way you funneled that information. This is actually super important too. So you get set a presentation or a task, or you might be applying for a job, or you might be trying to push a product into a new store, just stop for a second and get two pieces of paper, or just in your head, say, what do I want? What do I want from this presentation? Not what do I have to do? What do I want? And there's two categories to that. What do I want to communicate? So what must I show them? My skills. I might have to show them my background. I might have to show them I've done my research on the company or the project. But then there's a massive, massive component that's often overlooked, which is your personal qualities. How do you want to come across? Now, there's a reason Siri or Alexa are not doing your presentation, because a vital part of who you are in any sort of company or organization is how you can talk to people and how you can engage them. So what I tend to do is I get a piece of paper and I split, who am I talking to? What am I trying to say to them? And how do I want to be perceived? And we'll talk a little bit more about tricks on how to make sure those qualities come across in a moment. In the same vein, we want to know what the audience wants to get out of it. Now, that's pretty obvious sometimes. If it's a job interview, or if it's someone who's a prospective buyer for a product, they want to know the value. They want to know what's in it for them, the return of investment. But sometimes, again, the thing we overlook is, what do they want the experience to feel like? For example, I need to know, are the people that I'm pitching to or speaking to coming out of another meeting before me? Have they had a long day at the office? Are they being forced to be here? Now, I would like to think none of you guys at home are being forced to be here, so it changes the dynamic a little bit. But if they are being forced to be here, shock them. Show them something, which I'll call a wow factor later on in this presentation, that's going to grab their attention and show them they should be listening to you because you've done your homework and you're ready to impress even the less engaged types of people. I actually love this slide. Okay, so first impressions, it's absolutely essential from a psychological perspective, whether you're in person, whether maybe you've met the person before, but it's been a long time and this is the first time you're presenting to them in a professional capacity. First impressions are essential. Now, there's a photo on the left-hand side there, and that is from a TED Talks video. It's an amazing video, and he talks about how to engage people within the first 10 seconds. As you see on the bottom there, it can take as little as 5 seconds for the audience, for any presenter to decide that person's not in my tribe, or they're not going to connect with me, or they don't really understand where I'm coming from. It may not be consciously, but a lot of things that happen are subconscious. So whether it's the way you dress, if you're smiling or not, he actually talks about, if you can try this as well, if you want someone to feel connected in the first 5 seconds of a Zoom meeting, you want to grow a smile over 3 seconds. So you're going to give a nice smile, keep it going and hold it there. And you want to hold it there for about 3 seconds. And then it gives a really genuine connection. And you'll notice now the difference of when I'm looking to the camera versus looking at my notes. What we found is you want about 65%, or let's say 2/3 of your time looking up at the camera if you can. Now, stats have shown that most people will actually be looking at themselves. That's the weird thing about Zooms. But try as much as you can to look into the camera and know your content in advance. And on the right-hand side, that's what you don't want to do. Now, I would like to say I could probably do with my camera being a little bit, there we go. I could probably be better aligned like that. But you've got the skydiver, the bobblehead, the stargazer. We've all seen it. Please do not be that person. It is so difficult. You wouldn't put on the news or your favorite show and have the presenter talking to you like that. So these first impressions are essential to making sure that person is going to listen to you, not only for the next 30 seconds, but potentially 30 minutes. Make sure your camera's in the right place. If it's dark, get a light. If you need to get a new mic, do it. These little touches will set you apart from your competition, whatever the context. Moving on now to the structure. So we've done our research. We know what we want to say. We know how we're going to try and play it so that the audience are really interested in what we have to talk to them about. This is something I learned a while ago when I was at university, the primacy and recency effect. Now, what it essentially means is, if I was to give you a list of numbers right now, let's say 10 random numbers, and in 10 minutes ask you to recall them back to me, most people would remember the initial content and the content at the end, or the numbers at the end, and that data in between sorts to get washed away. Now, it doesn't mean in your presentation, people aren't going to remember the middle of the slides or the middle of the presentation. It doesn't mean that at all. But what it does mean is we can use this information to focus on the areas where we know people tend to recall. So when they go and talk about you internally and they say, we just had a presentation with Billy or with Joseph or with Samar, we know that we left a good impression at the end and we started strong. So for that reason, my golden rule is start strong and end on a high. And what you'll actually find is by doing that and creating this sort of sandwich when you're planning, you'll be able to get a lot of benefits. So I'll speak a bit more about that here. So for example, let's say you were applying to be a coder in a new company, right? And it's a bit scary and you don't know where to start because they've asked you to create a presentation. So you say, how do I want to start? And in this case, we use an example where we say, okay, I'm going to apply for this position because, and you talk about your childhood dream. And then at the end, you know, you want to come back and say, this is why I'd be a good fit in the company. And they've mentioned a charity project or, you know, some rough note. You don't have to have the full picture, but that's roughly what you want to do. Get your starting point, something that's going to capture their imagination or excite them, and then tie it up well at the end. You do not want a presentation that starts well and just tapers off. And I actually did that with this presentation. I started with the 2 blocks, the sandwich type of structure, and then we made the skeleton. And all that was just putting the little parts or the titles of each slide into a PowerPoint presentation. In this case, I've used Canva, which I'll explain more about later. But what that really does is it lets you have a breath and go, okay, there's my skeleton. I know it's going to start well. I know it's going to end well. And now through the next steps, we're going to review, does the information flow in a way that's actually exciting? And this will also let you have a good idea of, am I going to be on time with this realistic skeleton I've laid out? Have I got too many slides? You can choose to have lots of slides. There's no real rule. It just depends on if you're comfortable to stand in front of an audience with no real PowerPoint, like maybe Steve Jobs would have done, or you want to do something similar to what I'm doing now, where we're spending roughly a minute, I hope, on each slide. Now, so you've got your skeleton, you know what you want to talk about, and you've got a style. And this is a really intimidating part for many people. And I understand that because we're not all designers. I still remember the first logo I ever did. I've saved it on a hard drive. It's terrible. And it just humbles me because you never know that just because you started somewhere where things are challenging at first, you can't kick on and get better every year. So in terms of styling, the most important thing is going to be your tone and your theme. Now, what I'll actually do at the end of this webinar is we're going to provide you guys via email with a cheat sheet for all of the tools, most of them of which will be free or have premium features if you want to go all the way, that will help you pick a tone or a template to create a really powerful presentation in a short period of time. As I say, this is from Canva, the template that I'm using here. And it's really fantastic because it lets you focus on what you're good at. You don't need to go and worry about, you know, what goes where on each slide. You have a whole bunch of resources to choose from. But my rules for this would be when you are using these sort of template-based websites or solutions, even if it's in PowerPoint, you can't mix and match them. It just won't work, or it won't be worth the time you're putting in. If in doubt, keep it exactly how the template is laid out, change the text, replace the images in the same way that they've been placed. And at the end, come back and look and say, do I really need to customize this? I'm not going to win any points if I'm applying to be, I don't know, a teacher in a school, if I didn't adjust a template. So don't be afraid to keep to the style of the template. And less is more as well. You've noticed I really like the Recoded brand and the way it's done because it's so clean and clear. And if you look how iPhones have gone, almost any sort of UX UI interface, they're all trying to be simpler, cleaner, and send that message. On that note, what is important for us is the personality and the context. So if you're going to go for, if you want to be seen as a very serious person, or you want to present your product in a very serious conduct, then take a moment to put that into Google or to have a look online. What types of colors or themes will work and support that message? If you want to sell holidays to 21-year-olds, you're going to go with a whole different theme and a whole different approach. But you can look online and you will find a lot of different guides to work from. So I definitely encourage you to do that. Fonts. This is something you can get really caught up in unnecessarily. In today's society, if you're going to make a presentation, the golden rule would be not to use more than 3. So you want to use 2 or 3 fonts. And what I tend to do is I like to have one main font that I'll use in, let's say, 80% of the content, and then one font that I use as a voice. So the thing that complements a diagram. If we go back to a slide here, let's have a look. Bear with me. So how do we avoid this? This little message here is a lighter weight of a font compared to the big bold fonts we're using here. And it allows the eyes to flow from the top left, which is where the eye goes. When most people look at a screen or presentation, they go from the top left and they scan down like this, and the information should flow like that. If we use the same font here as we did here, it would be a bit messy, because you'd find if you did a nice scan in study, your eyes would go like that, and it is a bit hard for the brain to take it all in and listen to the speaker. So let's speed back up to where we were there. Okay. And as you'll see as well, when I'm switching through slides here, don't be afraid to be human. Unless you're doing this for Steve Jobs or Apple, sorry, and you have a really, really strict agenda, don't be afraid to be human. And you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to be able to go backwards and forwards in slides. Your headphones will die. Your Wi-Fi might drop. And I've been in some sticky situations. And the best way to bounce back from that is to just completely relax and laugh about it and be yourself. We'll look at 1 or 2 examples later on. Written content. This is something that is actually very important for us as maybe say non-designers or non like creative people, or people that are not so sure how to make a page layout. The amount of text you put on the screen is essential. Okay. People do not want to read even more than 3 or 4 bullet points. I was shocked to read that, you know, even bullet points can be too elaborate now. So you want to try and make things as clean and concise as possible. Can you condense what you're saying in a slide to have one message? And if you can't, can you make one category of information?
I didn't catch that. Could you try again?
And look, that's something that can happen. I must have said something that sounded like Siri. So I'll close my MacBook on the side there. But can you put together some content where one slide has one key message and not a lot of text? Maybe it's better for me to show you what I mean with this example that you had a glimpse of earlier. So this slide doesn't look too bad. But if I started here saying, in 1917, 15-year-old Ray Kroc lied about, you already know, oh my God, I have to listen to him read the whole of that extract. And maybe you would have been happy for me to do that had we put it together more like this. So if I was going to tell the story naturally and say, to be honest, I don't actually know the story for Big Mac naturally, but let's say I said in 1917, the CEO or the soon-to-be CEO found himself in one of these really old, rustic drive-through dineries in the United States. It's a whole different way of engaging the audience. You go back to this one here, and I personally think even just having that first paragraph would be too much. So utilize the time you have to learn your content. And if you don't know your content, maybe try and find a way to use the cues on the right-hand side of your presenter mode tool. So again, I'm presenting in Canva, and I have some notes on the side. And in those notes, what I really don't like to see people when they make mistakes with public speaking is their notes are almost as long, if not longer, than the content on the screen. One hack that I would like to invite you to do, if you're not already doing, is to do one of two things. The first is only put keywords in the side. So for example, in this case, if we were going to condense this, let's have a look. We could have the years, we could have the name of the person, and maybe the brother's name, Dick and Mac McDonald. That's it. You will remember the rest. You're not going to forget all of your content. But more importantly than that, what I'd like to see people doing more often, and when I'm trying to assist clients in how they can pitch, is using cues. Have your line ready in the bottom of your notes on the side so that you know what your sentence is that links the content from this current slide into the next slide. Super important because people want to hear a story. And I actually heard a statistic today that you are 22 times more likely to remember a fact or piece of information if it's embodied within a story. And that just refers to the fact itself. That's not even looking at the emotional impact that's having on the audience. So please avoid using lots of text and read your cues, not your content. Okay, cues, not content. Have your cheat sheet on the side of your screen and make it simple. Yeah, I definitely prefer that slide. Okay, what about visuals? The fantastic thing about designing now for anyone is if you have 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon, you have a chance of putting together an exceptionally stunning visual presentation. And what I will do is in this cheat sheet that will be sent out to all of you guys, you will have, like I said, resources for photographs, for illustrations, vectors, icons. And what I love now is if you look at all of these images on the right-hand side, we've got an infographic, you've got an illustration there. The fact that they're all the same color, that might have taken a Photoshop Illustrator in the past to do that. But now, with a click of a button, you can select the colors from your brand or the brand you're trying to represent and input it into these free resources, and it will create a really concise visual render or presentation. You'll notice on the left again, I'm mentioning iFlow again. One thing I've seen, and this happens also social media posts, which are a type of presentation. You've got your canvas, the place where you're going to put your artwork, and maybe you want to say sale, you want to say the price that the sale is going to be, and you want to have a photo of the product. And a common mistake is to make all of those three things 1/3 or have the equal size of the canvas. But that's not how our brain works. I invite you, to keep in mind of this when you see adverts on stories or in newspapers, on the television. If you see a new advert for KFC, you'll likely have a big picture of a burger, a small or medium-sized logo of the new type of burger that's coming up, and then the details very small. So in terms of using that space, and I'll put a guide as well in the cheat sheet of how to know how to lay out information so the eye flows naturally. And by the time the eye is done that flow, you're halfway through what you were saying, and the engagement level is staying very, very high with the audience. Moving on now. This is something, again, I think is really underutilized, or people are not doing this, is reviewing the presentation when you finish. So you've made your stunning slides, you're sure it all looks good, you've done all the steps from step 1 to step 3 we've just spoken about, but have you stepped back and looked at it as a whole? Because that is something that you have to struggle to do, because you're not looking at the presentation with fresh eyes. You are looking at it after hours, or hopefully not too many, of clicking, sitting and going through that. And it's hard for you to imagine what it looks like for someone else. So a really simple thing that I do is to do this. Zoom out, look at all of your slides together, have a picture of them together where you can see virtually all of them. And maybe in PowerPoint, you can't do it, but you get to a point where you can see almost all of them. But in most of these features like Canva, you can find a way to see them all. And you'll instantly be able to spot, okay, that slide, the photograph looks different to all of them. I don't know why it looks different, but something's not right. And you might notice that all of your photographs are zoomed in for close-ups, and there's one that's zoomed out and it doesn't match. So it's an easy way to cherry pick or highlight the areas where you need to consolidate your branding and your tone. And you can go out and you can delete things. You can also check, does the story flow? Is this going in the right direction that I want it to all the way through my narrative? How's my timing? I can see realistically, okay, that's a quick slide. That's a quick slide. You can wrap that up. And one of the most annoying things people state about meetings is when they run over time. And of course, does it end with a solid wrap up? Are you having a call to action or even just a thank you to finish with a bang? Final touches. You've done everything we've said, and now you just want to have a cup of tea or sit down and relax and finish. But there's one final step if you want to be the best or have that competitive edge on anyone else who's doing the same thing as you are or trying to get into those shoes. The wow factor. You go back, you look at all of this and you say, okay, who is it? Let me go back to my audience. What do they want and what did they want to feel? Go back in and add a wow factor. Now, I can't tell you what this will be, but if you don't know that you have one, it probably means you don't. It could be that you spend 5 minutes going through their Instagram or their Facebook, find something they've recently done, tie that into a bit of content on just one slide. It could be a really detailed mock-up you've done. And you know that that's what they're going to remember. And that's the thing they're going to love. And if anything, that's the slide. When someone says, can you send me those slides? It's usually for 1 or 2 slides. Which ones are your wow slides? You may only need one. But if you don't think you have one and you want to be in the top 10%, you need a wow factor. And on the same note, you need to spot the snooze moments. Okay, we know it's going to happen. I did it with this presentation. I looked back, I said, that's not that interesting compared to the rest. And so what can you do? Here are just 3 tips that I would use. 1, the cadence of your voice. You have the same content and you say it in a different way. So in this example, you can say sales are up 20%, or you can say sales are up 20%. Sales are up 20%. Or of course, you see where I'm going. Sales are up 20%. You can apply that to anything. Okay, that's pretty straightforward, but just keep these 3 things or save this slide. And if you ever think you've got a dead moment in your presentation, use this. You can also do polls. Or if you don't want to do that, reference the audience, call someone's names. Like I said, Jermaine, what do you think of that? Have you ever seen this happen before, Natasha? And so on and so on. Spot the wow moment in your presentation, spot the snooze moments, and that is why we put a cherry on top and make sure the presentation is going to be exceptional. Then you can have your cup of tea, knowing you've done fantastic. The last tip I'll give you is my sacred sticky note hack, because we've got all these things we're trying to think about when in a presentation. My sticky note hack is to get one very important message. It may be something for yourself, don't rush, enjoy it. Or David, the CEO, loves dogs, so you want to make sure you mention wildlife or nature, or just a simple reminder to mention people's names. Take a sticky note, put it on the back of your camera, so nobody knows that the whole way through your presentation, you're reading a little sticky note above there that tells you, no matter what, you're going to make sure you do this one thing. Excuse me. And with that, last piece of advice, if it goes wrong, which it may do, don't worry, okay? If anyone's seen this actual presentation, it is hilarious. If you haven't, after this, YouTube, Elon Musk smashed window. This was supposed to be a smash-proof vehicle. And as you can see, it is not. And from the look on his face, he is in a sticky position. He turned it into a joke and it was all fine in the end. Probably still painful for him now, but don't worry about it, okay? Once you've done the steps 1 to 5 we've laid out, it wouldn't matter if your internet went. You could come back into the room and close or leave a perfect impression. And with that, I would love to thank you for your time and welcome any questions you may have for us.